Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious recovery consultant. And I'm very delighted to have Erin Louis with me today. Erin describes herself as a brazen atheist. She was raised a soft Catholic and is a former stripper and author. She's written 3 nonfiction books about stripping. Her memoir is called Dirty Money, Memoirs of a Stripper. And then there's Think You Want to Be a Stripper, an insider's look at the industry, and Expose Yourself, a book about atheism, humanism, and critical thinking. Erin has most recently published a book of short erotic stories and co-authored a crime novel called Stripper Noir, to be released soon. She also has a column for Only Sky Media. And I'm so glad to have you here with me today. Thanks for coming, Erin.
Oh, thanks for having me.
We do seem to be running in a lot of the same circles because we've got the overlap of atheism, humanism, and then for a lot of folks also there's religious trauma in there. And that's how I come into the picture. And I was hoping you would share with us a little bit about what your growing up was like.
Well, I'm the last of 6 kids, so it's probably not shocking that my family was Catholic. I am 9 to 14 years younger than the rest of my siblings. So I guess after my brother, God apparently decided that birth control was cool. And then my parents were actually getting ready to split up, and they got together like one last time. And so that's how there came to be such a huge gap. And my parents were both raised pretty strict Catholic. So they both went to Catholic school from start to finish. They got married at 18 and 17. My siblings,
that's so young.
Yeah, mom talked a lot about that. They specifically don't get married that young. I have 3 brothers and 2 sisters, and they all had more of a traditional Catholic upbringing than I did. Because my parents were pretty much separated, like right as I came along, they kind of like baptized me and then just like gave up. So I didn't like make communion or anything like that. My Catholicism really centered more around, going to church on like holidays and things like that, weddings and funerals. So I didn't have a lot of the strict type ideas that not only the rest of my family did, but definitely not my parents, some of my friends. So it was really like I said, I describe it as like a soft Catholicism. A lot of the ideology that I was really like, I guess, indoctrinated with would have been more like Reagan Republicanism type Catholicism. I grew up in Orange County, so that was kind of a big thing. And my father's a small businessman. So more centered around like, alcoholism and tax evasion. God was sort of out there forgiving everything when you asked for it. So that's pretty much my upbringing.
And you were then largely raised by your mom, or were you shuffling back and forth?
No, my dad was very considerate in that respect, leaving me with my mom. So I would go and see my dad sometimes, but not really. Mostly, and what I describe, especially in my memoirs, is I was raised by my mom, technically, but my brothers and sisters were so much older than me that they really did a lot of the parenting. They did a lot of the heavy lifting when it came to the cooking and the picking me up from school and that kind of a thing. So even though my father wasn't technically around, I had 3 big brothers that were actually pretty awesome when I was a kid. So I was very lucky in that respect. But once my brothers and sisters all left, it was just me and my mom. So about from 10 on, it was just my mother and I. And at that point, pretty much when she got divorced, which was not her thing. Divorce was really devastating for her. And of course, Catholics aren't into divorce. So, she lost that real support system. So my mom had really left that fundamental Catholicism. I mean, she didn't really have much of a choice. I guess they kind of abandoned her. So it was just me and her. So I was very lucky when about 10 up until she passed, actually almost 10 years ago, that she had really let go a lot of the hangups. So when it came like puberty and like those really like formative years, especially when it came to sex and nudity and body image and things like that, relationships, I really got very fortunate that she had worked through a lot of her stuff by the time it came time to talk to me about that kind of thing.
Wow. So did she actually talk to you about the changes your body was going through, or dating, or those sorts of things?
A lot. Because once I was born and as she was working through that stuff, my mom had been a musician, and she really got into her music once she got divorced. So the divorce was actually a really, really great thing for her. And for me by proxy, because I didn't get stuck with a lot of that kind of stuff that she was taught. So, you know, her music was a real supportive thing in her time, but it helped her work through that. And so she started dating. She found out that she liked having sex with somebody other than the first person she ever had sex with.
Imagine.
So when it came time to talk to me about that stuff, she talked to me a lot about boundaries. She talked to me about how it was natural to go through, to get your period and to be kind of self-conscious. She talked to me about respect for myself and making sure that I demanded respect from other people that might be interested in my body at that point.
Wow.
And she definitely, like I said, or I guess like I alluded to, she definitely encouraged me to seek out other relationships and to kind of get to know what I wanted, both sexually and also emotionally and mentally when it came to finding a partner, so that I kind of did not end up in the same spot that she did.
Wow. So
did
she encourage birth control?
Oh yeah, definitely. I had a rough patch when I was around 13. And so I actually went on birth control pills before I even had sex or anything like that, because they thought that would kind of help regulate hormones or like behavior issues. So that was the excuse to put me on birth control well before I started having sex. So, but no, she was absolutely encouraging about that. I wouldn't say she was worried about me getting pregnant early or having to deal with that, but she definitely wanted to make sure that I was informed.
That's so amazing. That it's just the opposite of what I hear from my clients who grew up in overly religious homes and fundamentalist backgrounds. It's really refreshing to hear about a mom who cared so much about her daughter that she wanted to make sure that you understood about the importance of consent and respect for yourself and your body, what you could expect down the road as your body would continue to change, and even about relationships. That's very exciting. Way to go, Mom. That was just well done.
It was, and I didn't actually, until I know that we spoke a little bit, I had the opportunity to go to the Recovering from Religion fall excursion.
Yeah.
And that actually really opened my eyes to how different my experience was, because I would joke all the time about, being Catholic and Catholics don't read the Bible and, all that kind of stuff. And I really learned a lot from other people's experiences, and a lot of it was very heartbreaking for me to hear that. But it definitely made me appreciate my own background and how lucky I am to have not gotten saddled with a lot of that stuff. So a lot of admiration for people that come from that place and are working to get out of it.
Yes, it takes courage to confront the indoctrination that we received in childhood. Absolutely. I'm wondering, at what point did you embrace atheism?
I think because I skipped, like we didn't read the Bible. I got all the, like the squishy fun parts, the animals on the boats and all that kind of stuff. And they gloss over the really nasty stuff.
Yeah.
So I didn't hear a lot of that. And then, you hear like, especially Noah's Ark, was kind of one of those things where you're like, yay, all the animals are saved and everything's cool. But then you're like, but wait a minute, like the rest of this, like we're missing some stuff. And it seems like that's kind of a screwed up way to like get his point across. Cause like, didn't he drown like everybody else? Including all the other animals. So I think part of like that kind of stuff, when I actually like went down the path of like critical thinking without really knowing that that's what I was doing. It was the ethics and the morality of what I learned about God in the Bible that kind of started to crack that belief. That and the fact that it was the one magic thing that was real. So, you know, when you're a little kid and you're going off onto all sorts of playing pretend and things like that, you know, and maybe every once in a while somebody will say, oh, you know, that's not real. Or, you know, you grow up a little bit and you find out Santa Claus isn't real. You know, it's not the Easter bunny leaving you an Easter basket. And then you find out what Easter really was about, which was actually kind of disturbing. It's like the worst horror story. We're like celebrating. And so it was that kind of thing. It was like everything else is not real, but the person that I'm talking to in my head is real. And a lot of that didn't really jive, but it wasn't something that I expressed or really embraced until probably I was in my 20s. And I think that was more of a cultural thing. You know, everything's cool as long as you believe in something, at least in my realm. So even though I wasn't surrounded by a lot of religious people, there was always, you just have to believe in something, the higher power, the universe, you know, some kind of force out there. And when I really started to let that go is when it was really the ethics and the morality of the whole thing. When it's like, okay, so God help me, you know, my car start when, you know, the starter was going out, but there's like a lot of like starving kids and there's abuse and there's, you know, all this like violence and horrible things. And I'm like, you know, that's cool. I tell you what, God, why don't you I'll deal with my car. Why don't you go handle this other stuff? You know, like I'm good. I'm happy. I'm going to make it. But, you know, there's people like dying and starving and really miserable. And it really started to bug me that we give this entity all the credit for all the good stuff. And then like we let him off the hook for all the bad stuff because that's like his plan or his way of teaching us a lesson. And it's like, you know, there's some really disgusting stuff. And I kind of feel like if you can do everything and you know everything and you're all powerful, that, you know, maybe you can find a better way.
Seriously, there's an obligation there. Yeah, exactly. So then you were in your 20s, pretty much when you were able to put all those pieces together and be publicly like, nah, you know what? I don't believe this. How did that go over with your mom? Was she still holding on to some religion?
My mother, went back to Catholicism, before she passed. It's coming up. It's 9 years recently. And, when I started like actively reading and researching and stuff like that, I did talk to her about some of this stuff. And her idea, even though she did identify as a Catholic, her idea of God had really morphed. And I know that there's in our later discussions, actually pretty shortly before she passed, she acknowledged that she was actually an atheist or an agnostic. And she did not really believe in the idea of God, but she wanted to believe in the idea of God. Sure. And I don't think that she didn't tell anybody else, which would have made things a lot easier for me, coming out as atheist to like the rest of my family, because it sort of made me seem like I'm, you know, a liar and I'm just like misrepresenting what she said. But she was definitely an agnostic. Her God very much morphed into the reflection of her own ethics and values and morals. So her God believed that it was okay that I didn't believe, and that if there was a heaven, I was going to go to heaven. Right. So her God believed that sex was healthy and that sex was okay. And so her God was really a reflection of herself. And I think she knew that,
Mm-hmm.
but she liked the little ladies that she went and saw on Sunday.
Sure.
It wasn't something that she was ready to let go of.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Was a
when she
comfort.
passed, she identified as a Catholic.
Okay. So does that mean that your siblings, have they largely stayed religious?
Definitely held on to that soft idea of God. I don't know. I actually cut ties with a vast majority of my family about 3 years ago. So I do believe that most of them believe in God. I don't know how much of Christianity they actually practice or believe in. But I do know that they still hold those beliefs. And definitely my coming out as an atheist was not well received. It was, I would say, tolerated and not accepted.
Right.
Which made it a little tricky when I was writing. The first time I was actually published outside of self-publishing was Free Thought Today, the Freedom from Religions Foundation's newsletter. And, I was really excited about that, but it was weird to tell somebody that and be like, okay. So I had an article published, but, I wasn't really quite sure how to present that without starting a fight. My family was pretty Republican, and that has come to kind of morph to a little more, it wasn't the idea of Republicanism that I grew up with. I think that's the nicest way that I can describe it. It started to become a little more intense.
Yeah.
And so things got a little more contentious. So I believe the way that I actually described it was that I wrote for a newsletter that is supported by Ronald Reagan's son.
Oh my gosh.
Sort of how I slid that in.
Yeah.
Like, hey, Reagan likes this organization. We're good.
Right. Did they actually find out what it was about?
Yeah. As I became more vocal about it, because I started to write more, and especially as Expose Yourself came out, when I really, really wrote more and became more involved in the secular movement and things like that, and did a lot more podcasts and interviews and things. Right. It came out, and it sort of just became the big elephant in the room where we just kind of we don't really talk about it. And then it, like I said, I was tolerated to a point, but certainly not accepted. Right.
And your success in the writing world then has not been celebrated by your family because they don't espouse the same views that you do.
Yeah, I do think I have to give them a little bit of credit for trying.
Okay.
Like I said, even though we don't really speak anymore, I do think that they deserve a little credit for trying. Nobody ostracized me outright. Nobody really got in my face too much. There were a couple of really nasty comments that were really hurtful when I first came out as atheist. But I think that was really coming from a place of cognitive dissonance and just not really, I guess it took me a while to get to the point where I didn't take it personal. At the time, it certainly felt very personal, but I do think that it was really more of a reflection of their own uncomfortableness with questioning their own ideas.
Sure. Yeah, that makes total sense. I'm wondering, I'm so curious then, how did you end up dancing for a profession? And are you most comfortable calling it stripping? I know some call it exotic dancing. How about with you?
I don't mind the word stripper because I really feel like it's the most honest and accurate word. I officially retired in 2019, but I have come back to the club that I worked for last as a feature. So I guess I'm semi-retired. And I just recently found out that they actually do not refer to their dancers anymore as strippers at all, because they consider it I guess it's not politically correct, which is kind of blew me away. So they call their dancers entertainers, and they don't actually use the word stripper. And because all my books have the word stripper in it, it was actually, I guess there was some talk about whether they were going to use that on the flyer and the promotion because of that. But I don't mind the word stripper. Like I said, I don't find it derogatory. I find it honest.
And how old were you when you moved into that or started exploring that as a career option for yourself?
18. Mm-hmm. And I think like a lot of women that get into it, it was a temporary thing. It was an exciting thing. It certainly wasn't something that was supposed to last 20 years. Frankly, I'm surprised it lasts 20 years.
That's pretty incredible.
But yeah, I really just didn't like my job. I'd always kind of not really, I've always kind of gone against the grain, I guess. You know, I was kind of a pain in the butt as a kid. I didn't like, I just didn't like being told what to do. So getting out of high school a little bit early and then going right into the workforce was like, oh, wow, here I am, I'm free. And then I'm like, oh, wait, now I'm stuck in like a cubby with a headset and I hate my job and this sucks. Mm-hmm. And so stripping was really an alternative to that traditional type employment for me. So it was a way for me to get to not be locked down. Right. Or to not feel locked down, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. And you stuck with it for 20 years. And you obviously learned some valuable things throughout that career. 20 years is a long time to do anything. And you have managed to then also turn it to your benefit in writing about it. I think a lot of people are curious about what life is like for people who take off all their clothes on the dance floor, because it's something that most of us we just won't do. We don't have the bodies for it, or we don't have the inclination or whatever. So, and you went into it with no shame because your mom taught you to just appreciate your body. And then at some point you did end up with a family of your own. And you were still stripping at that time.
Well, there were definite breaks. So I retired officially, I think mm-hmm. like 4 times. So there were a couple of times in there where I took some breaks.
You're like a professional athlete. Keep coming back.
A lot of that. In fact, I still go to like a sports medicine doctor and things like that. And my doctors have always been like athletic doctors. 'Cause there's a lot to that. Mm-hmm. I got married at 21. And I was dancing at that time. I get asked, so maybe I'll just preempt this question, is people will say, what does your husband think of it? And I was like, well, I was a dancer at the time I met him. We did not meet in the club. He was actually working at a record store. But at that point it was a take it or leave it thing. So you just met me. You have the choice right now to keep dating me or to go find someone else.
Right.
He was 24 and out there. So he never had a problem with it. In fact, I would not have dated somebody that did.
Of course. Yeah.
I had seen several of my siblings get divorced. Obviously I came from, parents that had been divorced. So to be totally frank, didn't really think that I would end up as married as long as I did, mm-hmm. As I am, because I'm still married. But we did decide to wait for a while before we had a kid. Mm-hmm. I kind of wanted to see if this whole crazy idea was going to work out. I didn't want to be a single parent for sure. I wasn't really sure. I definitely at 21 was not ready to be a mom. I'm not sure I was ready to be a mom at 26 either. Not even sure how you think you're prepared for that. And then you're really not.
Nothing can prepare you for that.
Really not. So we waited a long time before we actually decided and made the decision to have our son. And before that, when we were talking about it, we were getting ready. I started taking prenatal vitamins way before I stopped taking my birth control pills. I went to culinary school. Wow. So I danced to put myself through that. And I thought, okay, well, once once I graduate, I'm going to get a regular job and then I'll get pregnant and that'll be the end of dancing. And about 5 months in, when I felt him move, and I just had a very tough pregnancy. I started to really think about, did I really want to go and work in the kitchen? Did I want to hand my kid over to, this baby that was, making? Am I going to want to hand him over to daycare? And so once he was born, I got back into shape and I went back to dancing. And so I was able to, work a couple of nights a week, but be home with him during the day. There was about 6 months where I did try to put him in daycare and work as a pastry chef. But I ended up netting, I think, about $2 or $3 an hour by the time I was done. By the time I was done paying for daycare. And then I wasn't with him. And so that was really the other thing. It was kind of like, I went through all of this and now I'm not, when do I have him? In the evenings and the mornings and on the weekends. And actually as a chef, not even then, because I worked all the weekends.
Oh, wow.
So it just, dancing actually, I guess, as silly as this sounds in my head before it comes out of my mouth, really facilitated that kind of like Ozzie and Harriet stay-at-home mom type life.
Sure. Yes. Yes. And so what would you tell young people today who are interested in getting into that line of work? What advice would you have for them?
I'm very, very careful about encouraging people to get into dancing. I'm always there. In fact, my messages are open for anybody that has any questions or anybody that is looking to get into it.
And you did your whole book about it. Think You Want to Be a Stripper?
I did. And in that book, I talk a lot about, it's kind of like a series of essays. So I talk a lot about the emotional impact, which is dealing with a lot of rejection. When you go into that kind of work, which is going to be not, because it's not full service sex work, so it's not prostitution. It's not that type of level. It's more like modeling or even waitressing or things like that, where, your money is based on what you look like and how people accept you. And, not everybody's going to like you. And when you have bills to pay and you have rent to make and things like that, that can make it very, very difficult.
Because you rely a lot on the tips.
It's all tips. So you're self-employed. So
you don't get an hourly wage.
No, in fact, you actually usually have to pay to work there. So you're actually paying out, which is a tax deduction. But you're technically self-employed. So when your money depends on your looks and you have a bad night or you have several bad nights or the economy's down or for whatever reason, it's just not working, it can be very, very emotionally difficult to come back from that. And then, of course, you're most of the time working nights. You're in an environment where drugs can be readily available, along with alcohol. And that can be very tempting when you're not feeling very good about yourself. You're constantly comparing yourself to other people. You may be getting rejected, which could be any number of reasons. But at the end of the day, when you walk out of the club and you haven't made what you wanted to make or what you needed to make, it's very difficult to not take that personally. One of my main pieces of advice that I always give is that if you are unable to get up on stage or to lap dance or to deal with customers or to deal with any elements of that job or really any job, if you can't do it sober, then you need to go find something else to do.
Oh, that's good advice. Yeah.
So that's really my main thing. And the industry has changed in some respects for the better. But there's still a lot of pitfalls. It depends on the market. I've never worked on the East Coast. I don't know what it's like out there. I know what it's like where I worked. So That's one of the reasons why I do try to make myself available for anybody that does want to talk to me or have questions, because I would hate for somebody to read my writing or look at some of the things on TikToks, where you have girls that are throwing money around and, oh, it's so great, everything's wonderful, because it can be that. There's definitely nights when it's that. But that's not every night. And I want people to, if they're going to go into it, I want them to have a realistic idea of what they're stepping into. So I'm very careful about encouraging people to get into it.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're enjoying my chat with Erin Louis as we talk about what it's like to be a stripper and a mom. I want to encourage you to follow Erin on social media. I'll make sure that I have links in the show notes for you. And I also wanted to remind you that I see clients one-on-one for religious recovery consulting work. If you are struggling with religious trauma yourself and you're looking for help navigating your way going forward, I'd love to hear from you. My website is divorcing-religion.com. And now back to Erin. And did you find, or maybe you don't even know, because I don't know what sort of camaraderie there is between dancers, but did you get a sense that the other strippers who were there, they wanted to be there? This was how they were choosing to make money and support themselves? Or was there any concern at all about, I don't know if it's possible to be trafficked into a job, like that, like dancing. What are your thoughts on that?
So you definitely make friends. You're there and you're all kind of in the same boat. You're in this industry that is outside the mainstream. So you all have something in common. So you can definitely make friends. However, you are still essentially competing with each other. So there is the politics that can happen and, some kind of the drama and the fights and things. As far as women choosing to be in it, you pretty much have to choose to be a stripper. There are Christian outreach groups that are anti-sex work and anti-porn. I've written a little bit about this, especially for Only Sky, that like to conflate trafficking with stripping or exotic dancing, which is mostly a fundraising ploy. Because you have to audition, you have to give your driver's license and your social security card. You sign a contract. And most strip club owners, it is in their best interest to keep their girls healthy and happy and safe. So they may look the other way when it comes to drugs or things like that. But for the most part, they need you there and they need you willing to work. And you are under contract. And so a lot of those contracts, of course, they have the arbitration clause and all that kind of stuff. But the last thing they want is somebody coming after them, because it's out in the open. It's legal. You do still have legal recourse if something happens. So the last thing they want is somebody scooped up out of the parking lot. The bouncers have always, in every club that I've worked at, have always been, very, very careful about protecting the girls and the women that they work with. Now, there's trafficking that can happen inside the club. Talent agents, porn agents. There's somebody I worked with who had signed up with a porn agent that turned out to be not good. And she ended up doing things against her will. And then in a place where she wasn't really able to voice that, then of course was preyed upon by one of these anti-porn groups who, then used her story to exploit her all over again and say how the sex industry should be totally abolished. Which even women that have been trafficked in that way don't feel that way. They feel like it should be changed. It should be brought out to the open, and bad actors should be, punished. There should be more regulations and all that kind of stuff. But nobody that I've talked to feels like the whole thing should be abolished. So if we start by saying you choose to get into it, you do. Getting out of it is different. So because it's such an independent thing, because it's a taboo thing, like for me personally, it was a lot easier for me to just go back into stripping than it was for me to go and try to get a regular job. Number one, because I'm stubborn, I'm a terrible employee, but I also, it's the easiest thing to do once you're there. So there were plenty of nights that I did not want to be there. That was hard. So yes, are you choosing to be there? You are. Is it hard to choose to get out of it? It can be, definitely. It's easy to get stuck in that, for sure.
Because of the money and the preferred hours, like you were mentioning before.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And the fact that, if somebody finds out that that's what you were doing, it may make it hard to find a job. If you did promotions, like a friend of mine had done, her face was plastered all over a bus that was, driving up and down the main streets. So it made her it made it hard for her to go get a regular job and be like, oh yeah, that's not me. And it's like, no, that's totally you.
Right.
So yeah, it can be hard. So definitely you can get stuck in there. And then, like I said, that's where the drugs and alcohol, can come into play,
And then what's it like? Because you've been in and out of it through the years. What's it been like to raise kids then while this is a part of your life, even if you weren't doing it anymore, it's still a part of the life that you've built for yourself. So how have you navigated that with your kids?
Thankfully, it's only one. Honestly, it hurts real bad. I don't understand how anybody has more than one. I do.
Amen. Yeah.
A lot of respect for people that decide to go through that a second time. So thankfully, I only have one. My husband has been fabulously supportive through the whole thing. I mean, both of us, we've been through a lot of stuff. It's been 22 years.
Wow.
It wasn't something that I talked about. So my son knew that I worked at nights. He didn't really question it. Wasn't really a big deal. He found a proof copy of my book, my memoirs, I think when he was about 13.
Okay.
And that was how he found out. He was upset that I didn't tell him. But he wasn't, at that point, he wasn't ready to talk about it, really. Okay. He was going through puberty, obviously going through
his hard enough time. Yeah.
It was a rough time. So we kind of just let it go and really just sort of glossed over it until he was ready to kind of start to kind of ease into it and get an understanding. As it stands now, this will make me cry. He said that he's proud of me, that I've been able to write about it. He still is not comfortable with people sexualizing his mother, which I think is completely understandable. But I don't know if he's embarrassed about it. I'm sure there's some of that there. I mean, and like I said, I certainly can't blame him for that. But I think he's proud of me in some respect, and I don't think he's ashamed of me. I think he's just, he's as he matures, he's getting a better understanding of why. And, we've always tried to give him the best life that we could. I think that definitely having creating this human being has been, one of the biggest learning experiences of my life. And my entire objective, since I had him, was, his well-being and his happiness, and to make sure that he was taken care of. And, dancing really facilitated that, even if it made things kind of awkward and rough as for a teenage boy. I mean, I can't pretend like that wasn't hard on him. 'Cause it was.
It's the relationship that you have with your husband is just, that's so interesting. I mean, that's almost impossible to imagine, coming out of a religious background and working with people who've come out of very tight fundamentalist backgrounds, to think of a partner who supports their partner in stripping for a living. I think that's just really interesting, and I think kind of beautiful, and presents a really solid picture for your child about people who love each other, even when things are outside the box. That's really neat. And you obviously are someone who marches to your own drummer. Did you find writing your memoir, especially about writing all the books, has it been cathartic?
It has. My memoir in particular, that was what I started with. And I didn't really think that it was going to go anywhere ever. In fact, it didn't until I entered the secular community. But I started writing partly because of the outreach groups that were coming around into the strip clubs. I knew one of the ladies that ran it because I'd
like Christian groups coming in trying to convert the strippers.
Yeah, and it was very dishonest. The way that they presented themselves. Mm-hmm. I found the fact that they were perpetuating stereotypes, including misinformation, in the fact that they were really conflating trafficking issues, sex trafficking with stripping, where you will definitely have sex trafficking in prostitution and in porn, massage parlors. And actually the vast majority of human trafficking, is actually labor trafficking. It's not even sex trafficking.
That's right.
And so to use that as a fundraising trope was really terrible. And the fact that I knew that she knew that wasn't true. And then there was the other part of it where she had a lot of struggles when she was dancing with drugs, and I don't know about prostitution, but she was having a good time out there, and that apparently was God's plan for her, which I found particularly nefarious because that's a really terrible plan for somebody. And I felt like she wasn't really taking like she was using that as a cop out. She wasn't taking responsibility for her own choices she obviously didn't feel good about making. I've made lots of really terrible, awful choices, a lot of really bad ones that were not ethical or moral, ones that I'm embarrassed and ashamed about. But, I got over that by accepting them and saying, hey, I was kind of a butthead and I have learned from that and I will not do that again anymore. And I feel like God was sort of a cop out there. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you have, pretend doctors like Dr. Phil and Dr. Drew and that kind of thing, preaching about how, dancers are abused. They have daddy issues. I would have to say that I do have daddy issues, but I'm not sure that I would say that is what made me start dancing. Mm-hmm. And, they really perpetuate the stereotypes and the stigmas about dancers where, there are plenty of people that have used it to actually work their way through college to raise a family. Mm-hmm. I know nurses, I know people with PhDs, like 20 or 30.
Wow.
Plenty of people that have come out of it and have been able to use it to their advantage without having to go through traditional employment, things like that. And so I got really tired of that stereotype and that narrative out there. And all I really wanted to do was put out my own story and just say, hey, look, there's another side to this that you're missing because apparently it's not as lucrative. So I put that out there and I just sort of let it sit there because I didn't know how to promote or anything like that. So I just kind of let it sit there. So it was cathartic in that respect to just be like, hey, there's an answer to what you're saying now. There's a flip side to this that people haven't seen. So in that respect, it was definitely cathartic.
And so when you spoke recently at the Recovering from Religion fall excursion, what were you talking about there? When you're speaking to groups of people who are coming out of religious backgrounds, what are you typically talking about with them?
Well, I had a lot of talking points planned and anecdotes. And I actually really kind of agonized over it because I didn't come from that background. And so I was worried that I couldn't relate. I was afraid of what I was going to say might not be helpful. And I was asked to speak about body image and sexuality, healthy sexuality, and that kind of thing, which is easy. But I was fortunate enough to get there a couple days early. So I was able to meet a lot of the people in person that are involved in the organization. And then also people that have, left that kind of fundamental background. So once I talked to people and had a better understanding of where they were coming from, I kind of scrapped a whole lot of what I was going to say.
Okay.
And I wanted to really meet them where they were at. And so I talked about being comfortable in your own skin, how even though I wasn't taught to be ashamed of my body, I definitely compared myself to other girls. I was bullied for how I looked, freckles. And, I was not the typical, beautiful kid or teenager. I was awkward and, looked funny, didn't know how to do my makeup. And I had small boobs and I had all this other stuff. I was super self-conscious. So I really kind of started with that. And then just talked about how, sex and our bodies are what we're born with. It's a natural and healthy part of life. And coming to accept that is really the path to living a more fulfilled life and to be comfortable with yourself and things like that. And so I really tried to talk about how I got there, because it wasn't like I just jumped into it and I was like, oh, yay, I'm naked. This is fun. This is great. No, it was weird. It was a little weird at first. And it took a minute to get used to it. And it took a minute to come to accept that I didn't look like, everybody else, even in the strip club, even at 18, I didn't really fit that mold.
How did your family respond to what you did, or was that even discussed with them? Like your mom and your siblings?
My mom was definitely the first person I told, and she was totally cool with it. Her first thing was, "Are you safe?" Mm-hmm. And once that was established, there really, she didn't really have any issues with it above and beyond that. I think the other aspect of the soft Catholicism that I was raised in that was really advantageous to me is the fact that because we all worshiped Reagan and money, it was easier for them to accept that I was a stripper than it was to accept that I was an atheist. Wow. Because I was paying my own bills, and I think the motivation there was clear. They had the same questions about my safety. And once that was established, it was kind of one of those things. Do I think it was totally accepted and everybody was like, yay, that's great? No. Do I think they tolerated it and at least tried to understand it? Yeah, I do.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
So yay, Reagan.
Yeah. Really? So I'm wondering then, what prompted you to leave? And you're not even completely done now. You're still doing some dancing. Is that correct?
Yeah. In 2019, right after Exposure Self came out, it was right before I turned 41. And so I had already been it's another pitfall is from about 25 on, I started to worry about my age, which is really sad. It's a bummer that I wasted so many years and I'm still wasting those years, being worried about getting older and, not just looking older, but, body wise, I have back issues. My knees aren't in awesome shape. I started having arthritis at 30 something.
Oh no.
So, I figured, this is my third book. I wrote books, holy shit.
It's so exciting.
Yeah. So I was like, this is a good time to get out. And then of course the pandemic happened. So it really was a good time to get out. And so, it felt like it was time to be done. And then I ended up with the opportunity to do a feature and do promotions. And that kind of was coming back on a whole different level where I'm actually being promoted. I'm actually getting paid to be there.
Wow.
I have set stage times. And so it's a whole nother animal than going back as on just working regular shifts and that kind of thing. So I guess it was maybe a little bit of ego and vanity that brought me back when they said I could come back and like have my own dressing room. And
well, I mean, that would be a lovely ego boost because
it
you
really
have to be in good shape. People have to want to look at you. So that is just really something. It's such a pleasure to speak with someone who so thoroughly owns their sexuality with no shame around it. That's really beautiful. And I just recently hosted the Shameless Sexuality Life After Purity Culture online conference, and folks can still get tickets for recordings at that event. But I wish I would have been able to have you as a speaker, and I will definitely keep you in mind moving forward because I think that body positivity is something, and certainly just embracing sexuality and enjoying being a sexual person and feeling empowered by our sexuality. That's just so hard for so many people who grew up saddled with purity culture, which I'm really glad wasn't the case for you.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, when people in this realm or this community had asked me to speak on it, I was like, well, that's weird. Because I didn't understand it. And I was like, well, what are you, what can I bring to this? And I definitely have expanded my goals when it comes to talking to people, because I would like people to experience that, because it's just really heartbreaking to hear people feel guilty about something that is such a natural human process. And it is such a glorious part of life. And to go about and to feel shame and guilt about that, about, any of it, that just sucks. And if I'm able to help, then I definitely want to be that force for good. I mean, doing what I did, I never expected to be where I'm at. I didn't think that anybody was ever gonna want to listen to me.
Wow.
So if I have if I have something to offer and something that I can help people that didn't grow up the way that I can, and that my experiences, good or bad, can benefit other people, then I definitely, I kind of feel obligated to do that.
Awesome.
And like I said, that's one of the reasons why I definitely want to make myself available to people that do have questions and that do want to speak, because that was one thing about giving a talk on this kind of stuff that I was hoping that maybe next time it can be more one-on-one, because, people are going to ask questions, but I wonder how many of people are not asking questions that they might not feel comfortable in that type of a setting, as opposed to like one-on-one. Because I talked to a lot of people one-on-one, and that was where I felt like I could really kind of, help at least soothe some of their anxieties and shame and guilt. It's just, the shame and guilt that is around sex and sexuality is such a control device. That's really what it is. It's not, it has nothing to do with the actual act or the body or the physical of it. It's a means of control. And that sucks. That's just a horrible thing to do to people. We don't know what happens after we're gone. We got the here and now. And, there's a lot of aspects of life that should be enjoyed. And that's really fun. And there just shouldn't be shame and guilt attached to it, especially when it's attached to an agenda.
Oh boy. Yes. Well, I got to say, you're preaching to the choir here.
I know, right?
How can people get a hold of you if they do have questions?
Well, I am on Instagram. I'm on Twitter, but my DMs are open for now. And Facebook. So definitely I'm pretty responsive to messages on all of those. Erin Louis 666 is my handle on all three.
I love it.
I'm working. What's funny is that whenever you go to pick, you put your name in there and they're like, oh, it's taken. You have to pick a number. Nobody ever picks 666. So I was
It's
like,
true.
there you go.
Why not?
Works.
And
Always
then
available.
you're also writing for Only Sky. And so people
Yes.
can leave comments on the articles there that you're writing for them. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk with me. I just really enjoyed it. I hope we get to meet in person.
Oh, me too. Me too.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning into the Divorcing Religion podcast. And I hope you enjoyed my visit here with Erin Louis. I will invite you to support me on Patreon. You get some great, juicy bonus material in there. And also just remind you that you can still get tickets for the recordings for Shameless Sexuality and the conference on religious trauma. And I'll have links in the show notes about how to contact Erin and how to contact me. Thanks, everyone. Take care.